Look, we do these ASEAN handshakes many damn times, right?
I call it lovey-dovey.
Right? I went through that hundreds of times, right?
Yeah.
But I made the point earlier, right? We don't tell stories to each other. It's empirical. The intra-trait is only 23% of the collective GDP, right? That just means we're not talking to each other. We meet, but we don't tell stories. So you've got to supranationalize it to some extent, just with respect to educational attainment. And I do believe, pragmatically speaking, it may just take Singapore and
Today's guest is someone very special whom we've been trying to get on the show for a long time. And the reason for that is because his podcast was one of those podcasts that we said, if there is a gold standard here in Southeast Asia, it is this one. And so our guest for today, it's a great pleasure to have Pak Gita Wirjawan here with us today. Gita Wirjawan was a former banker before going on to become the Minister of Trade in Indonesia. As Minister of Trade, he was responsible for helping the government to quadruple foreign direct investments into the country. Today, he is an educator. He teaches regularly at Stanford. He also runs this podcast called Endgame. Notice some of the similarities in the name as well. And on top of that, he also runs a private equity firm together with a previous guest that we've had on the show as well, a firm called Ikhlas Capital that he founded together with Tan Sri Nazir Raza. So without further ado, let's go to our episode and our conversation with Pak Gita Wirjawan. Welcome to the Game of Impossible podcast. My name is Leon and this is my dad, Idris Jala. We are a father and son podcast where we discuss all things transformation through the lens of business, leadership, sport and faith. And today we have Pak Gita Wirjawan here with us in the studio. Pak Gita, thank you so much for making the time.
Thank you. It's a pleasure, Leon, Idris.
It's
Finally.
Almost a year to try and get you here.
I know. My fault.
Well, it finally worked, and I'm so glad it did because, in many ways, before we started this podcast, actually your podcast, Endgame, was very much the benchmark for us, not just in terms of the sort of questions, the sort of conversations that were being had, but also the production values coming from a film major. I look at some of those things as well, so really appreciate what you're doing with that platform. But, while we're talking about Endgame, and you have a thesis that for ASEAN, the Endgame is for us to become a real force to be reckoned with globally. But, we'll talk a little bit more about the game. But before we talk about the game, I want to understand the player. And that player is you, Pak Gita.
You too.
Tell us, where did this initial kind of hunger or awareness to play this game begin for you?
I think it starts off with the recognition that it's a region of immensity and diversity that's way under narrated. We're not telling the stories as well to ourselves and to the rest of the world. And I tell people that if you just take a look at the number of publications on Southeast Asia, there's about 375,000 publications in the context of about 140 million publications. So that's around 0.27% of all available publications about anything, everything around the world. It's just a mockery for a region with 700 million people that represents about 9% of the global population to be narrated only to the extent of 0.27. And this is something that can be remedied. As for us to tell stories better to ourselves and to the rest of the world. To ourselves, it's empirically manifested in the degree to which, or the little degree to which, we trade with each other. The intra-trade within Southeast Asia is around 23% of the collective GDP. It's less than $1 trillion in the context of a collective economy of about $4 trillion of goods and services. The Europeans, they trade with each other a lot better at 63, 64% of their collective GDP.
Yeah.
I think it's got to do with not just complementarity, but it's got to do with storytelling to each other. If you tell stories to each other, I think you figure out what to send to the other guy that makes sense, as opposed to sending stuff that doesn't make sense.
Right. So let's backtrack a little bit, because storytelling, it's more of an art than a science, and sometimes it has to be something that's also caught and not just taught. And I wonder for you, where did the knack for storytelling begin?
From the time when you were young.
I think you can science art or artistry, and if for those that think that I can play music because I'm artistic, it's a bit unfair, because people tend to forget that I spent 8 to 9 hours a day on the piano for years. It's an acquired skills type of dimension, right? It's not just arts, right? So I think arts, you're right, but it's something that you can actually science
Yeah.
by certain discipline, right? You got to put in the hours.
No doubt about it.
You're not going to be a great guitar player if you don't put in the hours.
I put tremendous hours in a day to play
Absolutely.
guitar. I can look at a lick and say, how do I really stretch that sound to produce
There you go.
exactly the sound?
Jimi
Because-
Hendrix wouldn't
Yeah.
be Jimi Hendrix
No,
without putting in the
absolutely.
hours.
Yeah.
John Mayer would not be John
Yeah.
Mayer without putting in the hours.
No doubt.
Correct.
So you can actually practice.
But you would have needed that initial spark to get you going. So what was it that sort of inspired you to become aware of wanting to train that muscle of storytelling when you were younger? Was there a particular influence, a particular event?
Were your parents involved in influencing that?
No, it was my boss.
Your boss.
When I started working in the U.S. as a public accountant, I was the typical accountant who did not know how to articulate.
Right.
And I had a great boss who was just so damn good in telling the stories with not just literacy, but numeracy. And combining numeracy and literacy, I thought was just an innate gift within him. And he spilled the beans on me. Dude, you just practice talking to yourself in the mirror 10, 15, 20 minutes a day. That was when I was 24 years old. And I'm now 60, right? And I've been doing that every day.
And you still do that today?
Yeah, so it's an acquired taste, and it involves discipline. It's sciencing arts of telling stories. And I would encourage my brothers and sisters, friends in Southeast Asia to embrace numeracy and literacy when you tell stories. And I think we can do it collectively.
So since you mentioned your boss, let's go now to that game, the corporate game. Tell us a little bit about your career trajectory in banking. What were some of the milestones and key things that happened there?
I used a metaphor of jazz. Every time I pivoted, who would have thought I would be a podcaster 5 years ago, right? I had no idea. I mean, if you asked me 6 years ago, not in a million years, I would say, right? But then I think the root is being able to embrace something beyond the pre-existing corridor. And that's really jazz. Jazz is basically mastering conventional wisdom, call that classical music, and being able to syncopate, being able to improvise beyond the norm, beyond the pre-existing corridor. So when you syncopate, when you improvise, you take risks. If you got to play a suspended 4 chord, you might hit the wrong note, and it just so happens that wrong note tastes good, sounds good, feels good.
Yeah.
That's jazz.
Yeah, the ability to make art out of dissonance.
Absolutely. Right? As long as it's not cognitive dissonance, right? It could be audio dissonance, right? But my point is, I think my professional journey has been a manifestation of my willingness and, to some extent, capacity to take on risks, experimentation, right? So I started out when I was a kid wanting to be just an athlete. then my mother sort of like wasn't too happy about my being athletic or doing sports. Then I switched to music. But then my mother gave me the guidance to pursue something else. And it's always involved the whispering of somebody else or the whispering of your inner self. That allowed me to take on risks, to deviate or to syncopate or to improvise. So ask me again in 5 years, I might be doing something else by then, you know? So I think that has rooted back to understanding, embracing what jazz is all about.
How did this then shape your approach to, entering public office then? This appetite for risk?
When I was a banker at, one of the firms, I'm not going to mention names.
We know which one.
Yeah.
One of two.
So I was summoned by the then leadership of the country to give views on the economy locally. Then the next meeting regionally. Then the next meeting internationally. Then the next meeting, how do you fuse those with the geopolitics of things? How do you fuse those with history? How do you fuse those with the pre-existing cultures? And I've grown to like how the conversations, discussions, and discourses became more and more lateral, right? Of course, horizontal, but more importantly, lateral. And I had grown to size up that this is a man who understood what it meant for the little people, the big people, the country, and how the country should position itself. So by the time he asked me to serve, it would have been lots of digestions of what's to come, and I was ready. So did I plan? No. But, in spite of that not being planned, the surprise was not as surprising to me because, I'm going to be dealing with somebody that I felt comfortable with. And I was okay with that.
One of your sort of claims to fame in your time in government was how you quadrupled foreign direct investment into Indonesia.
That's misleading. It started from a very low base. So, but look, I think I presented the thesis. I tried to present the thesis as realistically as possible. I mean, I talked about corruptibility. I talked about the lack of education. I talked about the lack of internationalism. And people, when they attend to your sessions, they would have Googled you. They would have figured out what you were doing in high school. Right. So the meeting would have been a confirmatory type of exercise. So it's best or it's better at that time for me to just not try to promise the moon. Just tell stories with realism. And it checked out. So they felt there was credibility. So the trustworthiness, I think, came from credibility. Then later on, the trustworthiness came from accountability. So I differentiate between accountability from credibility. Credibility is when somebody trusts you before you start executing, right? Accountability is when somebody trusts you after you've executed, you can account for the stuff you've delivered. And I think the onus is on Southeast Asia to actually not overpromise. That, I think, lends more credibility to what you're about to execute. So underpromise, overdeliver was working out okay.
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of your podcast, and I listen to quite a number of them.
Dude, it's reciprocal.
And I find
mutual.
Quite a lot of gems and wisdom inside there. I've always talked to Leon on this episode, wonderful episodes. My view is that people have wisdoms. Wisdom come through experience and reflection. Clearly, you are someone who spent time reflecting on your experience. A lot of people have experience, but they don't have time to reflect on it. If you don't have time to reflect on, you cannot absorb it, and you cannot have words of wisdom that come out. In the same way as narratives, you cannot produce a narrative until you've had some experience on what's happening in the real world, and then you spend time reflecting on it. Then say, wow, this part is what I think is aha. This part is rubbish. This is noise. And I want to take the one that is aha. I coin them in a story that's credible, that people will buy and pay money to listen to. And that's the sort of thing that I see in you. You do spend a lot of time reflecting.
Absolutely. And people don't realize that the experience is rich with disproportionately more failures
Absolutely.
than successes. You know, before you stand on that podium, if you do sports, you would have failed more times than you win the gold only after you've failed 1,000 times.
Absolutely.
So to be an athlete, you learn to not be a sore loser because you failed many times more.
Do you have a process for how you process failure and reflect on failure?
Yeah, I'm naturally a half full glass. I try to see things with optimistic views or possibilities. And I think I've picked this habit up from when I was a kid, because I failed so many times. And the only way to bounce back is to feel a bit more optimistic. And I just sort of like consciously injected or infused that optimism in me. And of course, the ecosystem also helped. Parents, siblings, friends that encouraged me to just keep trying.
What was your biggest failure? And what did you learn from it?
Probably not becoming a full-time musician. I mean,
It's something fun.
Oh my gosh! I went to the U.S. on a music scholarship, right? I was dogged on professionalizing, right? And then at the end of my third year, I was getting contracts to produce. Right, this was in the U.S., and I called my mother, and she, being on the other line, was silent for 20 seconds.
20 seconds in reality is quite a long time.
Dude, at that time, international calls were very expensive, and I was not as well off as I am now. Well, I'm not well off, but at that time, I was a lot less well off. And that was a kiss of death, to something that I really desired to profess. But mothers are always right.
Yeah.
Amen. Well, my mom is sitting behind the camera there somewhere. So,
but I think I've failed in many other respects, dimensions. But I think it would have been awesome if I had just continued on, professing as a musician.
Well, I've seen you on some of your live events, and you still get to perform. So I suppose you're still exercising that muscle to some degree.
But I keep hitting my head because I could have played much better if I had just put in the more, the time, right? It's look. There are other instances where I've failed. I mean, entrepreneurially, I've not done as well as I would have, but I'm comfortable with being able to be consequential, particularly to the next generation. I'm a lot less empathetic to the current generation. I'm much more sympathetic to the future generation. And I say that in my book. I'm writing off, the current generation, because it's a bit hopeless at the rate that there's so much political neurosis in many places. At the rate that, that intersection between power and talent is a lot less optimal than needed. But I think the future generation brings much more hope because they're much more open-minded and they're much hungrier, much thirstier for a better future.
You mentioned an example of sacrifice in your case. So you had to sacrifice those maybe dreams of going into music to do other things. So that got me thinking, in any game that you play, there's always a cost to play, things that you have to give up, whether it's your freedom, because let's say you're training to be an athlete, then you've got to give up certain liberties to put in the time to train. what were some, maybe, was there a sense of sacrifice then when you had to go from your kind of high-flying corporate job to then going into public service? And how were some of those conversations with the family, if any?
I mean, cost, the way you look at it, it's all about, depends on duration, right? Mm-hmm. If you take the long view, you can always do all kinds of net present value calculation. It's going to net out positively, right? Which is why I've been spending a lot of time with geologists lately. I love geologists because they talk about what happened 150 million years ago.
Yeah, of course.
How the rock formation took place until today, since 150 million years. They have this great ability to think long-term. And it forces me to think long-term. And I can unequivocally state and assert that every choice that I've made has been consequentially positive. And it has gone through calculation of what it could mean to me and everybody around me in the long run. And take the podcasting, right? Sure, I gave up a few dollars, right? But the ability to reach out to millions of people and incite and excite them and inspire them about what they could do. I mean, it takes essentially 3 attributes, right? For anybody to be successful, it takes imagination, it takes ambition, it takes serendipity. Serendipity, you can take the view of just blind luck or smart luck. Smart luck is when you pick up your guitar and strum on it for 8 hours a day. Then you get good, serendipitously. That's smart luck, you practice. Ambition and imagination, I think, depend on who gets to talk to you. If your parents are inspirational, you'll have imagination and ambition. If your teacher is inspirational, you'll have imagination and ambition. But if you don't have great teachers, great parents, or great participants within the ecosystem, you're less likely to have the necessary ambition and imagination. So what I try to do in a podcast is to infuse through the conversations with people, imagination and ambition with respect to the young. As it relates to serendipity, I try to infuse a bit of that element of smart luck. Dude, just practice.
Yeah.
You might get lucky. Don't just burn the sands and pray. Right? You can't just burn the sands and pray. Okay, hopefully the gold price tomorrow will hit 5,000 because I've invested in gold. You can't do that. You've got to size up the market. You've got to understand supply and demand. You've got to science it.
Yeah.
And that, I think, requires, good conversations, discussions, and discourses as for you to elevate that element of smart luck or smart serendipity.
Talking about stagnation, and I was listening to an interview, Eric Clapton. Someone asked him, do you sometimes feel when you play the guitar, you reach a point that you just can't improve? He said, I do it all the time. And the positive thing he said was, when I play the guitar and I cannot improve, I stagnate, I keep playing the same style of music. Actually, that's when you have mastered your own style of playing. When you start thinking like that, however you give the guitar to B.B. King, he will play exactly the same way. He's actually plateaued. He's stuck in a rut. Because that rut is the uniqueness of the way the guy plays.
Absolutely.
He becomes the master of that rut.
Absolutely.
And that's the same thing with Clapton.
Yeah.
He's the master of that rut because he just can't get out from it.
Yeah.
So in many sense, when you think about it, stagnation in itself can be seen as something positive.
Yeah.
When you master that stagnation, it becomes unique. And that was the way he put it. And I paused and said, okay, there's something positive in being repetitive about something. Then you master precisely the way we do. People said, yeah, when I hear that sound, that's Clapton, that's guitar, and that's Leon. And so you got to master the art.
I'm with you, man. 100%. I'm with Clapton. 100%. I mean, when Herbie Hancock joined the band with Miles Davis, with Coltrane, of course, Miles would tell Herbie, stop playing those butter notes. He didn't have any idea what butter notes were. And I think after 6 months or a year, he consulted with Coltrane.
Yeah.
Dude, what's butter notes? Because he was too shy to ask Miles. You know what happens when you put butter on the bread? You put too much butter. You're playing too many goddamn notes, right? But look at Herbie. He continues to put the butter on the bread, right? He plays a lot of notes. And there is a segment that highly appreciates. Call that rot. Call that stagnation of whatever, boredom of redundant, frequent note playing, right? And I have gone through similar inflections. Musically, I would repeat the same boring, progression. And you know how I make value out of the redundancy? That's when I made mistakes. And the mistakes just coincidentally, serendipitously sounded so good. You practice your guitar 100 times on the same progression, you're probably likely to make 2 or 3 mistakes, or it could be more. And those mistakes might just sound more beautifully than you had ever dreamt. Right? That's the inflection. So I can deal with redundant, nature. I can deal with stagnation, but stagnation is not as boring as people think. And butter notes are not as boring as people think.
We have a joke. I call myself a Sunday musician because I play music in church. And we often say there's a joke. If ever anyone hits a wrong note, we say, oh, that wasn't a mistake. It was just jazz.
There you go. We can deep dive on this, man. There was one recital or concert when I was playing a classical piece, right? And it was outdoors, and the music sheets were laid out, at the piano, and the wind blew everything away.
Now you have to really seriously work on memory.
And I just winged it, man. And then my conductor, my music teacher, then. How the hell did you do it? It was on E flat. I just improvised through. It was Bach. And I just improvised on E flat. But, it's that ability to, or willingness rather, not necessarily ability, just willingness to take on. And sometimes you get by, sometimes you don't.
One of the things you talk a lot about, and you mentioned a little bit in passing at the start, was about owning a narrative. If it's butter notes, then it's kind of owning the butter notes. Let's now talk a bit more broadly. You've written extensively in your book what it takes, what it will take for ASEAN to essentially own its own narrative. Tell us a little bit more about your thesis on this for ASEAN as a region.
Look, I think we're going through what I call a geopolitical watershed. I'm in a camp that strongly believes that the US or the West and China are likely to be indispensable inevitabilities for a long time, defined 50 to 100 years, could be longer. I think the tension is highly likely to just be geopolitical, technological, and economic. It's a lot less likely to be kinetic. So if we hold that premise, it's inevitably going to entail a geopolitical equilibrium for Southeast Asia, right? Because China and the West are going to be countervailing against each other. And that's unlike what happened in the 17th century, when the Qing dynasty, the Manchus, decided on the back of transitioning from the Ming, decided to domesticate, internalize. They stopped wanting to externalize. That absence of projection of power by the Chinese in the 17th century caused an imbalance. with respect to the incoming forces from Europe, militarily, economically, culturally, religiously, and all that good stuff. That caused what I call the 3.5 centuries of humiliation in Southeast Asia, as compared to the century of humiliation in China since 1840 until the mid part of the 20th century. So if we believe in that premise, then the onus is on us in Southeast Asia. Because we're going to have stability, and we have tremendous peace and stability in the last 2,000 years. We've shed the blood of only around 9 million lives in the last 2,000 years.
Yeah.
On the back of differences of views or opinions with respect to sovereignty, race, ethnicity, and religion, compared to the Europeans who have killed each other, close to 190 million lives in the last 2,000 years. Just a little over 100 million of those numbers took place in a span of 35 years between the First World War and the Second World War. Add to that the Napoleonic Wars, medieval wars, the Byzantine period. So I think it's a given that Southeast Asia is peaceful and stable. And that's got to do with the fact that the cultural, religious influences that came from India, Arabian Peninsula, and China, and Europe, latter in the 13th century, would have been socialized as opposed to proselytized. That, I think, permeated beautifully into the social and cultural fabric of Southeast Asia. So if we believe in that premise, what does it take? Well, peace and stability is sine qua non to economic development. How do you develop economically? You got to increase your neurons, your cognitive capacity, and you've got to be more able to distribute cognitive capacity, the two of which we're not very good at. The IQs of Southeast Asians are disparate. The Singaporean here and all the rest are well below. The PISA scores for Southeast Asia, reflecting the lingual proficiency and the STEM proficiency of the 15-year-olds, are disparate. Singapore and Vietnam are the only countries that surpass the global average. Even Malaysia is below the global average. Cambodia is number 81 out of 81 countries. Indonesia number 69. Vietnam now is like in the 30s. Singapore now is number 1. So that educational divergence needs to be reduced. And at the tertiary level, we've got 8,000 universities with 19 million students, as compared to China's 2,600 universities with 39 million students. China clearly has been able to project intellectual power tertiarily and beyond much better, much faster, much more powerfully than Southeast Asians. So the way forward, in order to increase our cognitive capacity and increase our collective ability to distribute cognitive capacity, is to take a view on the tertiary and non-tertiary levels of education. How do you do that? I don't think you can just rely on the local politics, the local leadership of each one of the 9 or 10 countries. This has got to be taken a view of at the ASEAN level. I'm suggesting some degree of supranationalism within ASEAN. ASEAN has beautifully existed without supranationalism like we've seen in the EU. But I think for educational attainment convergence purposes, to reduce the divergence in educational attainment, ASEAN, I think, has got to be able to propagate onto each member countries. How about we copycat the educational system that's really good in some country, call that Singapore, and work out a differentiated timetable for each one of the 9 countries. One country may take 10 years, another country may take 8 years, another country may take 11 years, so that we reduce that divergence. And I would bet educational divergence is correlated with economic divergence.
Why do you think the countries in ASEAN don't want to learn and copy from Singapore?
Ego. And I think they're too busy with their own local matters.
Because it's so clear, everybody knows it. But yet none of them are really copying it. The example being, the World Bank put Singapore every single year on ease doing business is number one. None of the countries in ASEAN have bothered to ask them, how exactly do you do it? Can I learn from you? But nobody's bothered to do that. So the way they do it, they just look at the current way of doing it. They start to improve it. It would take 10 light years to get to there. But the quickest would have been take how they do it and then walk backwards to say, how do I implement this, and rub the name Singapore from it and put the name Malaysia or Vietnam or Indonesia and then localize it. That's all. Yeah. Same with education system as well. You don't try to improve the current way in which you do it today, jump into the frontier, but you're absolutely right. Something, somewhere or another, an intervention approach has to take place to cause that to happen, because leave it to chance. We've seen it for so long, nothing happens unless you intervene in one form or another. So you believe a superstructure would help to do that?
I do, but it cannot be with respect to culture, politics,
right,
everything else. It's got to be about education. And I think, pragmatically speaking, look, we do these ASEAN handshakes many damn times, right?
I call it lovey-dovey.
Right? I went through that hundreds of times, right? Yeah. But I made the point earlier, right? We don't tell stories to each other. And you know, it's empirical. The intra-trait is only 23% of the collective GDP, right? That just means we're not talking to each other. We meet, but we don't tell stories to each other. So you've got to supranationalize it to some extent, just with respect to educational attainment. And I do believe, pragmatically speaking, it may just take Singapore and Indonesia to pull it off. If the Singaporeans are open-minded with conceding and letting themselves be copycatted, well, they've got their own ego. But they've got to understand that it's in their vested interest in the long run to have a lot less divergence.
Sure.
Why? Because by way of a lot less divergence educationally, the ability to translate from uncertainties to risks will rise up big time. And the capital formation into Singapore and the rest of Southeast Asia will multiply big time. So they will be disproportionately a bigger beneficiary.
Sure.
As much as the others get lifted. Right? So Indonesia, because Indonesia from a population standpoint represents 43%, from a GDP standpoint represents more than 40%. So it takes the intellectual hub and the muscle to just agree on some sort of a framework. If they come out trumpeting this collective narrative, I would bet highly likely the others will follow suit. That, I think, would serve the region better. Why? Because the global challenges as they relate to ecology, climate, technology, economics, and geopolitics are evolving at a much more exponential rate. The more we as a region have to reduce that divergence. We brag about diversity, but we don't recognize that divergence is very different from diversity, right? And divergence is negative and diversity is positive for this particular region. So if we can get that done, we're going to be able to increase our cognitive capacity and distribute cognitive capacity. And I also talk about how we oftentimes pride ourselves as a democracy just by the sheer distribution of power to the hands of many, but not the distribution of public goods to the many. Public goods include education, healthcare, welfare, social value, moral value. What good are you as a democracy if you throw the banana skin, not onto a trash can? But it's amazing. As soon as you land in Singapore, you start behaving. You throw the banana skin onto the trash can, right? So I think democracy is a natural path forward for Southeast Asia. Why? Because we've got 4 monarchies in Southeast Asia, 3 of which, including Malaysia, Cambodia, and Thailand, embraced constitutional democracy. But the 4th one, Brunei, is an absolute monarchy. Laos and Vietnam are one-party states. They're not democracy yet. The others, Myanmar, Philippines, Singapore, and Indonesia, are multi-party states. So you take into account the 3 monarchies with constitutional democracy and the multi-party states, they represent 83% of the population of Southeast Asia. So Southeast Asia is naturally on a democratization path. But democratization has to be manifested in the democratization of not just power, but public goods. How do you distribute public goods? How do you create better public goods? You've got to have better cognitive capacity. You've got to have the wherewithal to distribute cognitive capacity.
So what is preventing Indonesia and Singapore from doing it? I mean, imagine we have Prime Minister Lawrence Wong and President Prabowo. Why don't you think the two of them figure out, why don't we take this idea and make it happen?
Well, again, it depends on duration, right?
Yeah.
Will it happen today or tomorrow? No.
No.
But I think if we continue this discourse in your podcast, in my podcast, in the classrooms you teach, in the classrooms I teach, I think it will happen inevitably in the nearer foreseeable future than you expect.
We need enlightened leadership, people that understand that you need to go down that path.
And I think the two of them understand that it's within their collective interest. Not just between the 2 countries, but I think within the 10 countries.
You worked with President SBY before. Do you think that guy actually had this possibility of doing something like that?
Yeah, but I also say Prabowo, I think, would not disagree with this notion or concept. And I would speculate that I think the leadership of Singapore might be open-minded to this idea.
Yeah, I think so too.
Yeah.
Because I think Lawrence Wong is a young guy and is much more progressive in thinking things through.
Correct.
I'm sure at some point he must have said, if my neighbors prosper, we will prosper too.
Everybody.
Because they're a hub. Because the beauty of a hub is that the hub for whom? If you hub for the region, that's if the region prosper and then they will prosper. So for them, it must be good for them to see all of the ASEAN countries really rise.
Well, he's just made a recent remark about a post-American order, which is thicker with uncertainties. So in a thicker, uncertainty-filled world, the more cohesive we have to be, the more convergent we have to be to thwart these global challenges. Uncertainties that are coming at a much more exponential rate.
You talk about convergence. I'm curious now, at what point, in many ways, I imagine both captains of industry as well as your, people in public office as being very much the referees in the game. And in order for different individual players to play with freedom, you can only play as well as the quality of the refereeing. But on that, between public sector and private sector then, what do you think is the best way for both to then converge and to collaborate in order to create these environments then?
I think the private sector has the ability to move at a much higher velocity and acceleration than the public sector. I would also speculate that in most countries in Southeast Asia, the private sector is filled with more better talents than the public sector. Part of the reason is that the public sector does not compensate talents as well as the private sector. So I would argue that the private sector could take a lead in the conversation. But I would also argue that some private sector players, they abuse that lead, right? So it requires 1 or 2 community multipliers within the private space to have the right conscience for the long game and to start the conversation in a good way. And I'm sort of a believer that could happen in a more or net positive manner. Once they take the lead, not abuse it, they can, I think, shape the conversation, the framing of the conversations, discussions, and discourses within the public sector. And the government or the public sector, I think, recognizes that they need to compensate better And through your podcast, through my podcast, it's pretty apparent that there's an undercurrent that shows a tremendous degree of hunger and thirst for intellectualization within Southeast Asia. And I would speculate or even bet a donut that many of these guys aspire to be in the public sector. And they take a view that by the time I join, I think I'm going to be adequately compensated. Not necessarily now. So if we believe in that, I think convergence is not an impossibility, right? If you've got one or two private sector players and you've got the government being filled gradually over time with better talents or better intersection between power and talent, then I think you can manage the conversations in such a way that there's going to be converging elements more than diverging elements.
Would having more technocrats in power speed that up?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's a given, right? If we compare ourselves with China, we've underperformed in the last 30 years. China's GDP per capita has grown by 10 times in the last 30 years. Southeast Asia's GDP per capita only 2.7 times. That's on the back of underinvestment in education, underinvestment in infrastructure, lack of governance, and lack of competitiveness. Lack of governance, paradoxically, is because China, as an autocracy, has been able to democratize talent. They've been recruiting talent a lot more based on meritocracy as opposed to loyalty and or patronage, whereas many democracies around the world have been recruiting talent a lot more based on loyalty and or patronage as opposed to meritocracy. So that's a de-democratization of talent, right? So I think the young generation recognizes. So we can fix that over time, not tomorrow, not 6 months. So, which is why you should spend more time with geologists.
Long game. Very, very long game.
And I'm not suggesting 150 million years, but I'm suggesting, I think in the next 10 to 20 years, there's going to be much more better people that will help technocratize decision-making, meritocratize decision-making.
Spend more time with geologists. I think that should be the title of this thumbnail. What are your thoughts? Because you've talked a lot about the same idea of, the reason why China has done so well is because of this democratization of talent, the meritocracy. What maybe you can weigh in here.
Well, the West doesn't really understand the way they do things in China. They think there's no democracy in China because they said, well, you guys don't run an election, presidential election to elect the premier. That's the other thing. They said, you don't use merit. But actually the Chinese government is absolutely full of merit. And their system is, I would call it a corporate world. There's no one in China that will reach the president, or Obama can never be the president or the premier of China just through an election. If you look, Xi Jinping, he rose all the way from the bottom through merit, right to the top. I mean, you look at Obama, the last job he had prior to becoming president, he was running a Senate. It was 50 people. So he only had experience of managing an organization with 50 people. Xi Jinping, he was running Shanghai, I think. That's the size of the entire Germany. So the guy actually totally understands what it means to run an organization, what it means to run a state, a country prior to going there. So you talk about, it ticks the box on all fronts. Meritocracy, he deserves to be there. He's got all the experience needed. That is why, in my case, when you look at China, you cannot look at China from the lens of the Western lenses when you start to look at it. You must look at from the way they do it. And that's why in our lifetime, Leon, there's no other country in the world that have lifted 800 million people out from abject poverty.
Unprecedented.
And I kept on saying to the folks in Africa, you guys must learn from China. That is the answer. And so, but it will take them a long time. 50 years from today.
You know what's the membership of CCP?
Yeah.
Close to 100 million.
Yeah.
By the time you sit on that standing committee, the Politburo, you would have
Yeah.
you would have been bruised.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, you would have been the principal of a school, a mayor of a small town, a mayor of a big town, governor of a big small province, governor of. You would have been bruised, and by the time you sit there amongst the 9 people, oh my gosh!
I talked a lot about the idea of bringing foreign talents into a country, and I was just quite enthralled by Ricardo Hausmann. He says the quickest way to develop a country is to get foreign talents. That's how America became what it is today. Singapore did the same thing as well. Many other countries did it. Australia did exactly the same thing. So what we can do in our countries, while we're waiting for all those people to blossom through our education system, bring the foreign talents into our country, but we must be prepared to open doors. If we are protectionists and we close doors, we will not bring those talents in. And we must be prepared to pay top dollar for them. And then I think if we want to speed up while we're waiting for the huge transition, for the groundswell of talents to come through our education system, what do you think about that idea? What can we do in ASEAN to make that happen?
100%. Look, I think the ultimate litmus test when it comes to democratization of talent is, let's say there's a village in West Java that needs the most appropriate teacher for quantum mechanics. And there's nobody in Indonesia that can do that. And it just so happens that the best expert on quantum mechanics is somebody from Somalia with a British passport. Right? Yeah. I'm stretching the litmus test here. But if that head of village in West Java is open to the idea of bringing that Somalian with a UK passport to teach quantum mechanics and pay her or him adequately, that's the ultimate test of democratization of talent, right? That sheer pragmatism. Now, President Prabowo, I think, has shown that open-mindedness. You know, he created this vehicle called Danantara, the new sovereign wealth fund. They've recruited. They've declared that they're open for business with respect to foreign talents. They've recruited a number of international. So in an ideal setting for Southeast Asia, it requires the guy at the top to top down it, right?
Top down, yeah.
But in the absence of a top-down type of leadership, you got to bottom up it.
Yeah.
How do you bottom up it? Get a lot more people to podcast. Right?
and talk about
and
it.
socialize the idea. And then embrace that sheer pragmatism that's been manifested in Deng Xiaoping, Lee Kuan Yew, and the Australians and the Americans and what have you. So I think if we've seen that in Singapore, we've seen some degree of that in Malaysia. We're, I think, likely to start seeing more, if not much more, in Indonesia. I think we might see this rolling faster than hoped.
True. I had to be an ambassador of Singapore, telling that story.
This is 5 counts now on this episode.
Philip Yeo, he told me very vividly how they in Singapore searched for the best talents around the world. And he related the story how he went to Paris to convince one individual that really needed that talent in Singapore. Before he went there, he researched how old are the kids, where are they studying, what kind of food does the guy like to eat, what is the favorite restaurant. He made sure he got all of that. And he promised them, if you come to Singapore, all these are provided for you. So the term that he used was, in Singapore, when we find the right talent, we hijack them. And he used the word hijacked. You must be desperate wanting to get them. You do whatever it takes to get them. And that's how they did it in Singapore. They absolutely threw away all those restrictions on foreign talent when these are top people they needed to get. That's what they did.
I had a conversation with one of the leaderships of one of the universities in Singapore last year. And he was bragging about the fact that he just recruited a Nobel laureate.
Yeah, you are.
A Russian with a UK passport, right? I said, dude, that's good. Wow, well, we got to pay him this much, that much. And he's asked for an R&D budget of this much, which is a lot, right? I thought, that's crazy. Well, we're actually thinking of recruiting 20 to 25 of these guys. That's even crazier, right? Is that just explain that in layman terms to me? And he goes, we take a look at MIT, they've got 100 Nobel laureates.
There you are.
Let's say we get lucky in producing organically one a year. We're going to have to wait for a century.
Absolutely.
We don't want to wait for a century. This is the kind of pragmatism that they embrace,
absolutely.
right? So we may have to do it inorganically.
Yeah, true.
And let's say every one of those 25 teaches 200 to 300 kids a year.
Sure.
So in 10 years, they would have taught 3,000.
For sure.
And you multiply that by 25, I think we might be able to cut it short to 50 years.
Yeah.
From 100 years. I mean, have I ever met any leadership in any university in Southeast Asia outside Singapore that thinks like this?
No.
So can that be copycatted? It can.
It can, yeah.
That just needs to be shared in a story.
True, in story.
That's compelling.
Yeah.
That's embraceable by the leadership. Well, if it's not embraced by the leadership, then it better be embraced by the civil society first. Then we can bottom up it.
Yeah. Let me tell a story. Now we're talking about a story. When I was a minister in the government, we talked about building the MRT.
Yeah.
There was so much resistance to building the MRT. Eventually, after we convinced the government that we could do it, then it came down to a very simple idea. Who is going to be employed as the project director? Everybody, the government, they said must be a Malaysian. And I argued vehemently that we shouldn't put a Malaysian as a project director for MRT because
what do we know?
No Malaysian has ever built an MRT. We must look beyond. And there was a lot of resistance. I had to go to Prime Minister to convince him to do that. But eventually, after they agreed, then they said, you must hire him based on the government salary scale. No way we could pay somebody to come with the wealth of experience on the government scale to come. Then I have to bring it all the way to the Prime Minister. Eventually we got the guy. And he was the guy that built the MRT in Singapore. 15 years he was in Singapore. The Jubilee line he built. And you see that guy when he came out there, he immediately, the day he came, what is wrong and what is right. They've done it before. Thou shall never do it this way. That's the experience for you. But again, talent. I was a story about, and I said, look, building an MRT is not for gifted amateurs. You're going to build tunnel underneath all this high-rise building. And what if those buildings all collapse because you haven't done it right? We cannot just play games here. We're going to put people who have actually done it. For the Prime Minister, he said, okay, you're right, Idris. Let's do it, break all the rules. And, to a lot of chagrin of a lot of civil servants, because we're breaking rules by jumping over everybody's head to get it done. I can tell you that I lost a few friends in the civil service.
But you became a role model for millions. Just remember that. That should, I think give you satisfaction.
Yeah.
Just telling stories.
Speaking about losing friends, I mean, I think maybe why people are, might be apprehensive about being a bit more vocal about telling their stories is sometimes in the fear of maybe disappointing or offending people. What has been your approach to, I think, not being afraid to disappoint some people in the interest of doing what's right?
Well, I'm very careful about. I don't talk about events or people. I talk about ideas. And ideas, or talking about ideas, I think allows you to be somewhat more distant from political sensitivity. And so far, I think it's been helpful to just stick to idea discussions or idea creation. And the comfort that I get out of this is that the young really are thirsty because they're I think somewhat disillusioned with the approach of the pre-existing mainstream, including the social media, the mainstream social media, which are just heavily interested in clickbaits. They're just primarily interested in festivalizing or sensationalizing the narratives, not intellectualizing. There is a thirst or a hunger for intellectualization.
Yeah.
That I think has given me, sort of like an anchor to believe in what I do. It doesn't mean that I've not pissed off some people with what I've said or with what some of my guests have said. That's part of the journey, right?
Yeah.
And then you take the long view. And whether it's positive net present value or negative. So far, I think we're believers of this being a net positive present value journey. Look, I think the end game for Southeast Asia is we have 5 great storytellers from each country out of the 10. Game on. I think I long for the day when somebody in New York, Sydney, Tokyo, Beijing would want to know about Southeast Asia. They call it Laotian. They don't just call it Singaporean.
Yeah, sure.
Right? Unfortunately or fortunately, that presumption or presupposition that the Singaporean is the best educated, the smartest, and the best storyteller. But imagine the day when anybody around the world, if they want to know, they want to understand Southeast Asia, they call them Malaysian, they call them Myanmarese, they call them Indonesian, they call it Bruneian, they call it Thai. That would be awesome, man. And is that an impossibility? Absolutely not.
No.
We can train people to tell stories with numeracy and literacy in the next 10 to 20 years. I guarantee you. I think we can do that. I'm in touch with some of these youngsters in, Indonesia. I can see them becoming great storytellers in the next 10 to 20 years with credibility and hopefully accountability thereafter.
Yeah, sure.
What are some ways that you try to impart this? So first of all, we can talk about people in your maybe teams who are younger, but actually even at home. So I'm connected with your son through Instagram. The beauty of social media these days is that we have connected on Instagram. I'm curious, completely independent of all of this.
Yeah.
And so, for Gian, who is also a podcaster, so in that sense, also following in your footsteps, but he's also a director in Ancora. What are some of the ways that you try to kind of instill some of these values for him and just for the next generation at large?
Well, I think you might have noticed I like to talk, but paradoxically, when I'm at home, I'm the least talkative. My wife runs the conversation, and my kids run the conversation. They propagate upon me. They impose upon me ideas and views and whatever, and I just swallow it. Okay. Then at such times when they see, what do you think? That's when I spill it out.
Yeah.
Right? And I think I've been fortunate that each and every time I've had that rare opportunity to spill out the beans, they I think appreciated what I had to say.
Yeah.
And that I think has been the journey at home. And I've always encouraged my kids to try to intellectualize ever since they were young. And I think they picked up this idea quite nicely. And I've always democratized them. I never have, I've never been like my mom was to me. If they wanted to do anything, just do it, man. If let your heart run you. Until you smash that wall. I've always been like that. There were times when I said, well, you don't want to look at this other stuff, but, I've always been democratizing.
Yeah.
That I think has been a privilege, honor.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, my wife has a doctorate. I don't have a doctorate. And that, I think, is a manifestation of how intellectualization within the family has entailed good stuff.
Leon and I were in Manila last week. As a family that on stage sharing their experience in family business. Their father studied many, many years ago at MIT. He came and started a very successful man. You know what they do? Every month they gather everyone in the family for a nice dinner, and they have a case study about the business. 3 generations, they sit down there to talk about the case studies. And they ask everybody, all the kids in the room,
including the great-grandkids
including
as well.
the great-grandkids, what's your idea about how to solve this problem? In fact, there was one particular one idea came from the grandkid. When the point was they intentionally do this.
Wow.
They were
So
three
let me
four.
guess, you discussed the case study last night with you?
We felt challenged actually by that because
We were so, wow.
our only form of kind of doing that is
Yeah.
by doing this podcast.
Yeah,
where
yeah.
we've started to put some intentionality behind it.
I-
But that was
really.
just another level.
And
Oh, man.
every month they do it. They put the
that
case
sounds
study.
Martian.
Yeah, yeah.
All the way to the grandkids.
Yeah.
Great
Three
grandkids,
generations.
yes,
They
that's
really ask them for opinions. And the adults keep quiet first. Let the kids come with their views. And it becomes so intentional. It's a routine that they do. It's incredible. That's how they get everybody to embrace new way of thinking, intergeneration.
Yeah, I mean, I always believe that you are only as good of a leader as you are a learner. And so I'm curious for you, what are some of the biggest things that you have either learned or are learning from other members of your family?
Well, the nice thing about being quiet at a dinner table, I learn a lot more than I teach. Right? Occasionally, I get a chance to teach to other members of my family. So that's the learning part. The unlearning part is subconsciously or consciously. It's when I discover that their viewpoints are superior to my pre-existing discipline. Right? So that's when I unwind mistakes that I've made or I'm making. It just kind of happens consciously or subconsciously or even unconsciously that, oh shoot, I should have done it, whatever he or she's saying.
What's an example of something that they have shared that has challenged your views or your way of thinking?
Well, my podcasting idea came from Gian.
There we go.
Same here.
Well, we're in the same club, man.
Jurassic Club.
So when he broached that idea, he was in New York, and I go, "What's that all about?" And then he goes, "At the rate you like to talk, at the rate that you like to think, and might as well consider it." So then I have a film company, right? And we've produced quite a number of. And I called the CEO, and what do you think? And he said, "Holy, that's a great idea. Let me put up a few pages." Then the next day, which is 2 days after the idea was broached to me the first time, he came back with a 17-page PowerPoint presentation on what podcasting is all about. And it jots out the positives and the negatives. A lot more negatives than the positives. And funnily, let's go back to the positive page. Let's go back to the positive. I kept wanting to go back to the positive, positive. I sort of wanted to shy away from the negatives because I wanted to focus on the positives as they relate to society or, societal development. And I just said, let's do it. Now, here's the catch. When I set out to do it, I sat down with the guy that helped me in rolling this out. And he was like, oh my gosh, this is not going to work the way you want it. Because I said, I want to sit down with the smartest person on anything for at least an hour and a half to 2. But, people love to listen to and watch TikTok for only 30 seconds. Great, let me be different, right? And he goes, at best, you're probably going to get 5,000 views. And I said, 5,000 is a heck of a lot better than 4,999. And fast forward 5 years, we've been viewed cumulatively by 120 million, and we've gotten
With 1 million subscribers.
a million subscribers. So the more I see and smell and feel the pulse moving in the kind of direction that my instinct was telling, the more optimistic I feel.
Sure.
So that was unlearning and learning at the same time. From the get-go and at the early phase until today.
Well, Pak Gita, thank you so much for your service in doing that, in being able to tell stories. I think the fact that you have amassed such a following, that the podcast is doing well, I think that is testament to really the bright spots, if you like, for the next generation to tune into the long form as the long form fights against the short form. Thank you for your podcast, for all you've done, and really for sharing your thoughts on today's podcast. It's been a real pleasure to have you on board.
It's an honor, Leon.
Thank you.
Idris.
Thank you very
Finally.
much. Finally.
Thank you all for listening to yet another episode of The Game of Impossible. We hope you enjoyed this conversation. If you did, we encourage you to subscribe to both our YouTube as well as Spotify. We upload episodes weekly at 6 a.m. every Friday. And we also have short form content on both our IG as well as TikTok at The Game of Impossible. Thank you all for listening, and we'll see you next week.